Missouri has two obvious options to replace Cody Schrader, and I have to say I'm leaning strongly toward one of them. So let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Coming up on today's program, going to be very running back heavy, and I also want to address the rumors that are out there that Texas A&M may be going to the Big Ten. Frankly, I'm not really understanding that one. Let's actually break down the logic from every angle. Before we start the show there, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I do want to start today's program by talking about replacing Cody Schrader. Of course, one of the most exciting players, one of the best stories, maybe in all of Mizzou history, certainly in recent Missouri history. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's going to be easy to replace what Cody Schrader did last season. But I do have the confidence that Missouri is going to be able to get it done because I think we have, number one, enough options to get it done, but also I have enough faith in this coaching staff, not only Eli Drinkwitz, but of course Curtis Looper, Missouri's running backs coach, as well. So really, here's what it comes down to. How is Missouri going to replace what was, of course, an obviously very productive player in Cody Schrader last season, a guy who finished top 10 in the Heisman voting, set Missouri's all-time single-season rushing mark? Well, it's either going to be Marcus Carroll, the transfer from Georgia State, or Nate Noel, a transfer from Eli Drinkwitz' old stomping grounds of Appalachian State. In fact, Noel's freshman season of 2020, that was Drinkwitz' first season at Missouri, of course. That leads me to believe that Drinkwitz has to be at least fairly familiar with the Miami, Florida product and his running style, his strengths and weaknesses. So something interesting to note there. So to me, you break it down into a couple of different tiers. There's Carroll and there's Noel, a couple of guys Missouri plucked out of the transfer portal this offseason from the lower levels of college football, still Division I college football, but not the Power Five, the Power Four as we now call it. So both of those guys were four-year players, by the way. This will be their fifth year of college football. So two guys with extreme amounts of production and also experience versus the other guys on the roster. We're talking about Tavorus Jones and Jamal Roberts, who last year for Missouri combined for exactly one carry. That was Roberts' one tote against the Arkansas Razorbacks in a blowout late last season. You've also got Kewan Lacy, a true freshman who was a genuine surprise on signing day in an era where there aren't a whole lot of genuine surprises. The scuttlebutt was that he was an Ole Miss guy. Well, on signing day, he signs with Missouri. And Lacy, a guy who's really, really talented. Frankly, Ole Miss has done very well at the running back position under Lane Kiffin. So for Missouri to get Lacy, that's a real coup for sure. And even as a true freshman, you'd think, hey, this 2024, there's going to be some early games in particular where you'd think that Missouri could get his feet wet a little bit in maybe 2 or 3 games, make sure he still can keep his eligibility and yet still be around late in the season just in case you do have some serious injuries that pile up at the running back position. Regardless, I'm very interested to see his future, but again, based on the recent history at Missouri for Eli Drinkwitz, how he uses running backs and true freshmen in general, I wouldn't expect to see a lot out of Kewan Lacy this season, but he seems like a guy who could be the future of the position. But again, as to the present of this position, I'd say Noel. If you're looking at it, I don't think I've seen these odds over at FanDuel Sportsbook as per yet. But if you're the type of person that's projecting forward, looking for, say, a dark horse candidate to lead the SEC in rushing, well, Nate Noel, I think, would be a pretty good option. If he's able to take a hold of this job, well, Drinkwitz has shown, again, over and over again in his head coaching career so far in 5 seasons, including at App State, he tends to pick a running back and go with him. So at the same time, having said all that, and I've seen plenty of hype out there for Noel on the internet, and I also think if you look at App State's run scheme last year, I think it fits more of the outside zone scheme that Missouri is going to implement and implemented last year with Cody Schrader. But at the same time, having said all of that, if I had to bet on one guy to take the majority of the snaps, the lion's share of the running backs snaps this season, I think it's going to be Marcus Carroll. And here's why. It's because, again, Drinkwitz likes to generally roll with one running back. And if that's the case, what you saw is last season, Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel each had their career highs in carries and touches last season. And the difference was, while Noel, after a really hot start to his season, seemed to fade a little bit. Certainly got far fewer touches as the season went along. In fact, middle of the season, had 1 carry in a ball game, 8 carries the next game, where it seemed like he must have had an injury of some sort. Information on App State is a little bit tough to find sometimes at your fingertips. But regardless, after a season in which Cody Schrader had 276 carries, a true bell cow running back for Missouri, well, Marcus Carroll was much the same last season in his 4th year in college with Georgia State. Just 2 fewer carries than Schrader last season with 274. And again, Carroll actually excelled his best season in college with that workload. So what does that tell me? That tells me that Carroll is probably more ready to handle a big workload this season. At the same time, having said all of that, I do think, again, Carroll, to me, the guy who's likely to get the majority of the carries. I do think this season, though, should be a bit of an exception to Eli Drinkwitz's rule at running back here so far at Missouri. I think Nate Noel should at least be sort of the 2020 version of Tyler Beatty, whereas Carroll should maybe be the 2020 version of Larry Roundtree. Again, Larry was in there most of the time, did a lot of punishing action, and when it was working, they kept feeding Larry. But still, Tyler Beatty was an important part of that offense, and it portended, obviously, bigger things in 2021. I really think Noel is a very talented and explosive player, but I just personally wouldn't want to make him handle the same type of workload that Roundtree took in 2020, or certainly as Schrader took in 2023, or frankly, even as Tyler Beatty took in 2021. So bottom line, I would like to see a little bit more of a lightning and thunder approach, if you will. I think that Noel and Carroll, I think their talents are a bit dissimilar in a good way. I think they're complementary, and I think this will be a good season for Eli Drinkwitz to at least a little bit rely on 2 running backs instead of 1. And with 2 guys who have a tremendous amount of experience, well, maybe this is the year for that. But that's some talk about the current state of the Missouri running back position. Let's talk a little bit more about the future of the position. Who do I think is going to be the starter in 2025? Plus, let's talk a little bit more about the quarterback position beyond Brady Cook on this year's roster coming up here in a little bit as well. First, though, let's talk about FanDuel, where as much as I love sports, if you're not into Major League Baseball this time of year, a bit of a hole in the sports calendar, I have to admit. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood, quite honest with you. And of course, while I love playing the Missouri Tigers plus 180 to make the college football playoff this season, hey, I always like to check out the Major League Baseball odds as well. You got the Royals and the Cardinals opening up a quick 2-game series tonight in Busch Stadium. As I try to pull up the odds here, and for some reason they're not up. What's the deal with that? Is there some kind of pitching question or injury here? But anyway, regardless of what you're into, you got to check out FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Again, all summer long, FanDuel hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just go to FanDuel.com. It's FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And for you everydayers, you know what, just a quick scheduling note here. I meant to have Brian Smith in today. Had to push that back to Thursday's program, so I look forward to talking about Missouri's recent recruiting victories with the Scoutmaster here on Thursday. But when it comes to the future of this running back position for Missouri, one thing it's interesting to note is it seems like Missouri has pretty specific size parameters that it likes at just about every position on the roster. I was talking about the linebackers in the last week or so in Missouri and just noting that they, along with the strong safeties, the stars on the team, all pretty interchangeable size-wise at, say, 6'2", 220 to 230 pounds, somewhere in that range. Well, just about all of Missouri's running backs at this point are about, say, 5'10", 220 pounds. Cody Schrader, for example, last season, 5'9", about 210 pounds. Well, same obviously goes for Tavorus Jones and Jamal Roberts. Now, what's interesting here is that Jones definitely had the more highly touted high school pedigree. In fact, he was one of the first guys in a long time, just one of the most notable, out-of-state 4-star guys. Those type of guys that I've talked endlessly here recently, seemingly, about how Missouri, until very, very, very recently, doesn't get those type of players. Guys like Javen Boggs, guys like, of course, Lamont Rogers on the offensive line from this weekend as well. But it seemed like Jamal Roberts, the redshirt freshman, Tavorus Jones this year, a true sophomore, so this is second year in the program for both guys. But it seemed like Roberts had the edge, at least for that third running back spot, behind Nate Pete and Cody Schrader last season. But again, then he got one carry as that third running back. Just goes to show you once again, not only does Eli Drinkwitz lean hard on his first-string running back, but also very averse to playing young players even in garbage time unless they've really, really earned that opportunity. So it would seem that there's a big opportunity open for both Roberts and Jones in 2025. But I have to say, life comes at you fast, especially these days in college football, because the transfer portals we saw once again this offseason at the running back position, well, the portal is always open every single offseason now. This is our new reality. Plus, of course, Kewan Lacy will have a year of experience in the program. And not only that, Jamarian Morrow, a recent addition, a guy who had some real big-time offers. He's going to be a true freshman 2025, part of this excellent Missouri recruiting class as well. So bottom line for Jones and Roberts, I would be surprised if both of those guys were in the program in 2025. This is our new reality of roster burn and churn. Well, if one of those guys or both of those guys are not getting any significant action this season, they don't see any path to playing time in 2025, look for Missouri to hit the portal at the running back spot once again, because I just don't necessarily, for as talented as I see Kewan Lacy, as I see him being, I see all of his potential, I just don't think betting on a player with that little experience really lines up with Eli Drinkwitz and his preferences that he's shown us so far. Now, as some of you eagle-eyed everydayers have surely noticed at this point, well, some of my segments lately have been thinly veiled position previews, but I'm smart enough not to just put up, hey, position previews for running backs, because frankly, that type of content tends to die a death unless you actually put a interesting headline on top of it. Just a little tip out there for all of you who are J-school people and trying to be a Mizzou mafioso yourself one day. You don't have to be boring. You really don't. But speaking of thinly veiled position previews, well, you might be wondering, why not more quarterback talk so far? Well, frankly, what's the drama at the quarterback position so far for Missouri? We know Brady Cook's going to be the starter, and when it comes to the backup position, there's a reason that Missouri went into the portal and got Drew Pine, because with Sam Horn missing the season with Tommy John surgery, there really is no other option. There is no other realistic option on the roster. You're talking about true freshman Aiden Glover at that point, who Brian Smith, the scoutmaster, told me is a guy with definitely some physical talent, but he's more on the developmental side of the prospect ledger. So expecting any true freshman, much less a guy who really isn't all that polished as of yet, to expect that he's going to have any chance to even be the backup quarterback this season would be a little bit nuts. So what are we talking about then? Who's the third stringer for Missouri, the emergency quarterback? Frankly, if we get to that point for any extended period of time whatsoever, well, this season is probably a disaster at that point. No offense to walk-ons on the roster like Tommy Locke, Harold Blood Jr., or Brett Brown. And if you're not tired of winning just yet, well, we could be looking at another recruiting victory on Wednesday, 3 o'clock Central Time. Charles Bass, a safety from East St. Louis High School, could be yet another four-star player that commits to Missouri. We'll just have to see what happens again Wednesday at 3 o'clock Central. Obviously, I'll have all of my takes here on the Locked On Mizzou podcast. Also coming up, speaking of takes, next week, July 15th, going to be coming back 5 days a week. Also, Missouri going to be hitting the podium and standing behind the lectern at SEC Media Days on Tuesday, July 16th. Of course, Eli Drinkwitz will be there, and coming along with him will be Luther Burden III, Brady Cook, and defensive lineman Christian Williams. So, of course, I'll have everything notable to talk about on SEC Media Days down in Dallas, Texas this time. It's going to take a little bit to get used to, I suppose. But you know what? We've had a lot to get used to these days. And speaking of change, could Texas A&M be heading to the Big Ten? Well, there's been some rumors floating around online, and since my colleagues over at the Locked On Podcast Network, many of them are addressing it on their shows, well, I think it's fair game for this guy as well. So let's talk about A&M possibly going to the Big Ten here in just a little bit. But first, yes, let's talk about Gametime, because I love going to Major League Baseball games. I really do, and I've attended many Cardinals and Royals games over the years against each other, not only at Kauffman, at Busch Stadium as well. That 2-game series starts at Busch tonight, and with last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, I had a lot of fun the past few months, well, really a few months ago, debating on whether or not Blake Baker, Missouri's defensive coordinator, going to LSU, whether that was a lateral move or not. Well, not going to revisit that argument, but what I will say is to me, any team going from the SEC to the Big Ten, hypothetically, or vice versa, going from the Big Ten to the SEC, to me at this point, that's truly a lateral move. Now, Big Ten fans and advocates could certainly say at this moment, well, you know what? Actually, the Big Ten has a better television deal that pays out better than its SEC counterparts, for example. And right now, that very much is true, but it's marginally better. It's not like it's exponentially better in terms of dollars and cents. So if you're Texas A&M, are you really chasing a short-term bag there? And again, to me, to make what is essentially a lateral move. Long-term, is the SEC really in a worse position than the Big Ten? Well, no. In fact, I think regardless, if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC right now, you're one of the major college teams that's in the catbird seat. Now, there could be a few exceptions to that. In fact, Jamie Pollard, who is the athletic director at Iowa State, when the Pac-12 was falling apart and the Big 12 was very much involved in musical chairs, he did say, quote, "It isn't the SEC and the Big Ten. It's those that have all the gold that make all the rules," right? So what if a member of the Big Ten or the SEC, if I were a member of that conference, I'd start looking over my shoulder and wondering if the day is going to come when the top of the SEC is not going to want the bottom of the SEC. So to me, that was a little sour grapes there at the time by Jamie Pollard. Now, if I'm Vanderbilt or I'm Northwestern, I could see that type of thing. Heck, maybe even Rutgers could be a little bit nervous as a junior member. But if you're somebody like Missouri, quite honestly, if you're Texas A&M, certainly, I think you're obviously safe at this point. Again, you're in the catbird seat. So if you're Texas A&M, to me, the only real reason to jump would be spite. Pull the Bill Self move and cut off your nose to spite your own face. Just because Texas A&M seems to hate the Texas Longhorns and that university and their institution that much, it just seems like, I know that they were upset. I know that there was leaks by Texas A&M to the local media that, hey, A&M, we're not about the Longhorns coming. And they definitely stamped their feet and tried to throw a fit and act like they had some power here and say, nope, we're not taking Texas. Obviously, the SEC said, you know what, we're going with Texas. So I'm sure they tried to mollify and make the people at Texas A&M feel good. But at the same time, the Aggies are still here. It's 2 years later. The Longhorns are officially here. I just think all these rumors are a little bit silly at a certain point because while I understand why Texas A&M people might want to thumb their nose or maybe pop up a middle finger or two at Texas and their administration, I totally understand that. At the same time, does that do anything for you? Are you just cutting off your nose to spite your face? Why are you making a lateral move to the Big Ten to play a bunch of teams that, frankly, you don't have as much in common with, geographically and otherwise? So to me, I don't know, just none of these rumors make any sense. And to this idea that maybe the Big Ten would have given Texas A&M a sweetheart deal in order to increase their geographical footprint into the state of Texas, I see the value there for the Big Ten. I really do. But the idea that they're going to give A&M a better deal than what is given to Michigan or Ohio State or any of these other teams, that kind of goes against what the Big Ten has been about for the most part. So I just don't really see that happening, quite honestly. So Texas A&M, whether you like them or not, whether they like the SEC or not, meaning their fans and administration, I just think for now and for the absolute foreseeable future, it just makes so much more sense for them to stay in the SEC than go anywhere else, even if it is the other mighty Big Power 2 conference, if you want to go that far, in the Big Ten. So, with all that being said, thanks for joining me here as always, and apologies for having to put Brian Smith off here a couple days. But again, I'll be with you here on Friday. We're going to talk about Charles Bass, going to talk about all these incredible wins on the recruiting trail by Missouri with the Scoutmaster. So, until then, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.